No, I think the problem is that I don't know if it's going to be good or not. I don't remember exactly what I was thinking there, but I had a thought.
I never know if anything is going to be good or not. So, hi, welcome to the Jonny Random Show. Today we have a new guest that hasn't been on the show today, my sister Rebecca, and then of course recurring guest, my father Mark Gideon and Matt Gideon, my brother. And today's topic is education. We're going to go deep into the some issues surrounding education, talk about some things that some reforms, possible reforms that would be good, and some just general suggestions that we have. So I wanted to start with preschools and just talk about like free preschools, get your thoughts on that, and like curriculum things, anything you guys want to dive into. It's kind of an open conversation, but we'll start with preschoolers, and I will let Rebecca take away this first question. So, do you think preschools should be free or some sort of like subsidized by the government to a certain level? And then also just talk about the curriculum and any suggestions there that you may have.
Yeah, I think that deciding whether it should be free or not is rather a large question. But as a rule, I would say generally making something free does not improve it. Um, of course, that does give you more accessibility for people, but then you have to work through funding. And as we've seen in our elementary schools and all of the schools, um, having government funding is not always the easiest way to go. So, I mean, for accessibility, free would be great, but subsidized would probably be a more realistic way to actually still have a functioning daycare that's worth sending your kids to.
Are you saying that because the more government funding might come with strings attached, basically?
It definitely comes with strings attached, and also just getting the funding and keeping the funding and not having enough funding are all very real issues. Um,
So
so
as someone who has worked in the daycare like world, what do you think the daycares are doing uh, poorly most of the time, or could be done better? I know one of the frustrations for me as a parent and having my kids in daycare is outside of the ridiculous cost, is that you're like if you're 2 minutes late or 1 minute late, those fees start adding up, things like that. It gets pretty outrageous. Um, yeah, I don't know. Any question or thoughts on that as far as ways to make that better?
um, as far as to make it better with fees,
Well,
or
just anything in general. I don't know. That's just the first thing that I thought of.
yeah, I mean, I definitely preschools are very expensive, and those fees are additionally more expensive. But also, when you've got people that are sitting around waiting for one child to be picked up, you also have to pay that person. So I don't have a good solution on the fees there, but I think preschools do a lot of things really well. But I think one area that not all preschools do very well is actually teaching through active play, which is something I'm pretty passionate about. Um, actually um, taking time to build curriculum that doesn't just involve, sitting down with a coloring sheet or rehearsing their ABCs, and the things that kids can learn at the preschool age is just amazing. But I think our expectation of what they should know going into kindergarten is a little high, um, and maybe a little bit off base, because we don't allow them to play, and that's one of the best ways for kids to learn is through using their hands, through experiencing the world, and that's very hard to do inside of a classroom. It can be done, and some places do it extremely well, but I think in large part it's not done very well at all. And we expect kids to sit still in a row at crisscross applesauce and go through their little daily checklist of things and send them on their way. And it's a great way to keep kids busy, to not have chaos ensue in the classroom if everybody's doing the same thing, but it also kills creativity. So
You make very cute robots, though.
they are very cute robots. And like I said, their ability to perform is amazing. They can retain a lot. You know, they, their capacity to learn at a young age is huge.
Yeah.
But I think we risk stifling their desire to learn
Mhm.
by making them sit still and follow our curriculum, which doesn't allow for individuality. And I think that's a problem all the way up through high school, is not allowing for anything to be outside of the mold.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And as people, we're too different. We're too we have too many diverse needs, and even with taking into consideration special needs and kids that need extra support, which we're getting better about identifying that and finding ways to help, but I think we're still a ways off from, as a whole, doing that cohesively and well.
Yeah. Matt or Dad, do you have any thoughts on that? On the education techniques, and speak to maybe funding if you have any thoughts or concerns there.
Well, to the techniques, I would say that there's a balance to everything, and while you don't want things to be repetition to the point of boredom, repetition has two daughters. One of them is boredom, and the other one is learning. Without repetition, you can't learn. So you don't want to make it feel onerous, which is a big fancy word for, bad for a kid. You don't want it to feel like they're doing something that is just pointless. So you have to have the point of it showing, but you also have to have them continue to do things, because imitation is how we learn. We look at it as a child, we look at an adult, and we see something that we like and we imitate that. That is how we grow. Like, oh wow, that adult can cross the room in seconds. I want to do that. Let me start trying to walk. I can't do that. Okay, what can I do? So, imitation is how we learn. And whether it be the inspiration of seeing an amazing painting and being like, well, I can't do that, but let me see what I can do, or to being able to read a book to the class and tell a story, and then like your eyes light up and you're like, wow, I want to be able to read a book and tell a story. Imitation is the way that we learn, and imitation requires repetition. But if there's not that buy-in, if the child is not buying into what you're doing, it's pointless. They may do what you say, but it won't help them. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
I would
Yeah.
say that there are ways to reinforce things without
Hmm.
doing the exact same thing every day. And, it might be that you
Oh,
need to
yeah.
do the exact same thing for a week,
Hmm.
and then you change it the next week. And you're teaching the same concept, but in a different way, so that it doesn't become boring, and so that it
Right.
catches the kids that didn't get it by the way you taught it the first time.
Hmm.
Because there's so many different ways that people learn.
Yeah. You want it to burn in without burning out.
Hmm. And you want them to feel excited that they're going to get to learn something more.
Mhm.
I Dad, did you have anything on that front?
Well, my thought is the key is always the teacher, someone that has the gift, someone that thinks deeply about the job that they do each and every day. There are, there's people that are educators, teachers that just come in and they're doing a job for a paycheck.
What's wrong with
They don't
that?
know how to manage a class. They don't know, um, the only thing they know is to bully this kid into, sitting there doing, this craning thing, whatever, type thing. Really haven't thought about learning and how, to do it well. So it goes back to the colleges and getting the right people to do the training. Somebody that has a PhD isn't necessarily good at classroom stuff.
Yes.
I ran into this in the training field. You would have people that went from college into workforce development, but they never really worked a job. They never worked on an assembly line. They didn't do that type of thing, and then they're now hired by the state to be a trainer because they have a degree and they can deliver a PowerPoint presentation, but they don't really understand training and what it's like to be in an assembly line or on working out in a warehouse, wherever it is. They haven't had that experience. They don't really know. They may not even have ever had a job at McDonald's, Chick-fil-A, or something before they went to college. And you find that there are people that are working in college as a professor, and they were A students through school, never had any problems. They have high IQs. They never struggled with anything. They never worked a job. They went through and they got their PhD, and they don't, and they can spout off what the book says, but they don't know how to teach a class. And that's where, you know, you can have a degree. So I'm not against degrees. I mean, I have a master's degree, not against degrees, and I'm thankful for, my education, but there's something different about the skill set that looks at things and sees the patterns and sees how do I communicate and get these things across to, someone. And it's true in programs. You can have somebody that's not been to college working in a Head Start program or a daycare that has that gift. I mean, and has that ability, cares, and they can be you know shown how to use the materials and different things along that line. So and then you can have somebody that has all the degrees but just fundamentally doesn't know how to teach a class. And I've seen that, because I was on a school board for a Christian school for a number of years.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
something that you're saying, there's somebody that said teaching or learning is recognizing patterns, right? There you have to connect something familiar and then build upon it. Learning is just foundational, like like learning. I can't learn something that I can't recognize. So it's seeing a pattern. And so I think what you're talking about, people that get out of school and then they start right away and teaching, and then they never had any practical hands-on experience in work. It's hard to connect what you know to something if you don't actually know what you're connecting these things to, per se. It's really hard to translate and get over that barrier. So having that skill of like actually learning something, getting on a factory line, or whether it's practical, if you're a math teacher, using that math in some discipline outside of an educational um, environment, and see how that applies to certain situations, how those calculations go into whatever it is. It helps you start developing a sense for how things work that you can then take and translate it. And so when people ask questions, you're able to articulate and make in a way that it's like you're setting people up to connect it to things that they know and that they can recognize it. It's that translation thing to me. And then one thing that I was also thinking about with daycare specifically, I've had 3 experiences with daycares. One was when, my oldest was, in daycare. It was at a military facility, and they gave discount rates because of the military service, but they still charged you for being late. Um, but they were open really, really early because, you know, you have so it was longer hours. It was like a 12-hour or something long daycare. And it seemed to serve my needs as far as like I could drop her off whenever I needed to, and I would always be able to pick her up before almost. I mean, always able to. It just seems like the availability was there and it was affordable. And then when I was had that stretch of time where I was a single father and my middle child needed daycare, he I took him to one daycare that was relatively affordable and got the heebie-jeebies about it. It just seemed like the people weren't paying attention to the kids. They weren't paying attention to I could have been anybody just walking in there. And like
There was no security to
there
it.
was yeah, the security, like they had built-in security things where you had to have a code and all this kind of stuff, whatever. But like if you were walking in with well, as a patient was patient, as a person was walking out, a parent was walking out, you could just sort of go back there and pick up any kid and like it just seemed like it was teenagers or like college kids that just didn't seem to have a clue. And so there's no requirement for preschool educators to have a degree. So um, eh, there's no, at least in Tennessee, I don't know if that's across the board, um, but yeah, I had him there one day and I never took him back. Actually, they probably still have his little stuffed animal teddy bear because I was just like, I'm not doing that. And I went over to this other place that was more expensive. But I knew that they would care about him, and I had the cameras on his phone, and I knew the people that worked there, that owned it better, and so I felt like that was a more safe place for him to be. And but now I work across town and picking him up, and now my youngest is at that same daycare, and getting her before that time is almost impossible,
Mhm.
and so it makes it, you know, I I guess for me, there's daycare. I probably spent 4,000 something dollars on one semester. We didn't even start her in the summer, and so by the time it gets to next year, I mean, it could be spending like $12,000 on just daycare. Like that's an insane amount of money, and I I don't know how single parents do it. I don't know how I did it when I was a single parent. I mean, I didn't. I packed my lunch every day, and I was at the time I worked around the corner, so it was nice. I could wasn't spending a lot on gas, but I don't know. It just seems like it's very, very. There's there's no real way to have affordable daycare. The preschool that they have at school, it stops at 2 o'clock, and then you've got to trust that your 3-year-old child can get on a bus and go to aftercare or something. It's yeah, to me, how we do preschool is it needs to be, and I'm not necessarily for like free daycare, but I feel like much more affordable daycare would help a lot of people in our society. Now I know it's after they get to a certain age they can go to other school, or they'll be going to you know um uh yeah, I don't know, but I guess that was my experience, and I personally do support probably some sort of level of like subsidies for like daycares, so that those daycare workers can be paid decently, and the parents don't have to shoulder the entire burden. But again, I like you, I'm like skeptical of the concept of like when you get money from the state that there's strings attached, on how there's you have to teach this, and you have to have a certain number of this, and these kids have to be tested this certain
Yeah.
level, whatever, and it takes away some of that. Kids do learn differently. I mean, what Connor learned in um, daycare and what Cammy's learning in daycare are like, you know he he's not advanced in school by any stretch, and she is, and they went to the same school. I mean, Chloe was advanced too, but I don't know if it's just girls are smarter than boys, but you know, and that might be part of it, or at least like the ability to have the retention and interest in learning at that age is different. So
Scholastic intelligence.
yeah, and that's fine. So, but yeah, does anybody have anything else on preschools before we go to grade school?
Um, I can point out a couple of easy problems with the idea of having it subsidized. So, for instance, in Rhode Island, the health, not the health, sorry, what do you call it? Property taxes go towards your education of your children. So people are paying, everybody's paying roughly the same amount, percentage wise, to take care of kids, whether they have seven, none, never had kids, right? So everybody's paying it. And there's a lot of people who are like, what? Why? With the roads, everybody drives on them. Everybody benefits from it. But when you have something so uneven as childcare, if you tax everybody and you put everybody's taxes towards it, it's gonna create two big problems. One thing is if it's a flat rate, then people who have a ton of money are paying the same amount as those who have a little money to go towards something that they may or may not benefit from. It gets really messed up. So I will say that it is those problems would need to be addressed in some way before you could put government money towards that. So that's just from a practical standpoint. I would say that there's other problems that you guys have mentioned as well to that too. So, Rebecca, it looked like you were about to say something.
I definitely, John Mark, you pointed out the kind of the discrepancy in your own telling of your story, where it's not necessarily because the preschool was less expensive, but they probably couldn't afford to hire people that were better trained or higher educated
Or more
because
motivated.
or more motivated
Yeah.
because they didn't have the funds to do that because they were charging people less. So I've worked in a daycare, and I was fortunate to work in a daycare that did a really great job on a lot of things. Like, they went out of their way to really go through the process of finding good employees that were actually dedicated to educating children. And daycares, at least in New York State, I don't know what it's like anywhere else, but are very heavily regulated on the size of classrooms, of just everything that you could even possibly think of. There's a regulation for it. But finding people that are willing to actually stick to those, and having the bandwidth to have people checking up and making sure that those kids are being taken care of well, is a whole other thing. And even the ability to have cameras in the classrooms, that's another expense. So subsidies would help, but getting the funding for that, I think, would be hard.
And problematic.
But it is just one of those things. Like, the more ownership that a company has of their profits and what they can do with them, generally the better quality or the less quality you have. Like, I'm not going to say it's a flat rule, but it's a pretty good one.
Well, I think there's maybe like a life cycle of a business in general, right? Like that when a company first starts, it's much more motivated to do really good quality. Once it gets to a point where it's got profits coming in and things stabilize and they start expanding and opening multiple things, you always have a point, at least in my experience with multiple companies, is there gets to a point where it gets bogged down in bureaucracy and things don't change and things become, we do this because we do this. And the reason why is because that's the way we do this. It doesn't get any better as it grows. And I believe that the one that was a little cheaper, and we're talking about $40 cheaper, rather than being 250 a week, it's 210 a week. Like
Mhm.
not a huge difference on price, but significance where enough for me as a single father was looking for the cheapest thing,
Sure.
and so um and I guess that does, over, that many kids, it does equal amount of money and does change the amount that you can pay your staff. But that company it was a larger company. This other one that cost more was just an independent, like they only have one daycare. So I think that when you talk about, as they're more established and have more profits, I don't know that that necessarily always translates to better care, because I think this other place had to charge more just to stay afloat. The other place was getting, because the volume, they were making probably more profit, and they're like a chain.
Yeah.
So, but that didn't translate to better care, So
Community connection is the big thing there. You mentioned that was a single one. Usually, the hospital that I used to work at up here in Rhode Island is the only one of it's the only one in Rhode Island that is not a big chain of hospitals. It is an independent hospital, and the level of care is phenomenal by comparison to the other ones, because because it is small. They know they have to be really interconnected with the community, and they do a great job of connecting with the community and volunteers helping and things like that. The community takes pride in the healthcare that we have to offer, and I think that it's the same thing with that. Is they because they know that they rely on the community, that independent daycare. There's a connection, and there's an accountability that just naturally happens when you know that you're taking your child to a daycare of the community, and it's small. Keep it small. Dad, you're muted.
yeah, Dad, I think we did.
Unmute. Okay. So, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, okay. I guess I got the reversed on the.
Really?
It says mute up there, but it's to hit the button to mute, not
Oh,
that I'm
yeah.
mute at the moment. So it's like, okay, what does that mean?
If you're ever
So
in doubt,
anyways,
look at the
one of
bottom
those
left of your
moments,
screen.
right? But something I, I thought about when Rebecca was talking, I think she hit on it. You have to have a teacher that's good. And I mentioned that before, that cares and those types of things too. But you also have to have good administration.
Mhm.
Someone that hires, you have to work with other teachers. You have to work within the system. I've been fortunate to work with some great administrators that made my life, easier. And I've had administrators that just and systems. It's hard
Mhm.
to it's hard to survive in a system that's dysfunctional. As much as good as you are, the system usually wins. It's terrible to say that. You got to be individual, and change the system and all, but that system can just beat you down bad.
Yeah.
Where you just quit. You just say, I'm done. I'm out of here. I can't work in this environment, type thing. So it takes both. It takes uh, you know an administrator that hires right, that knows how to train uh, their personnel, gives them the support, gives them the parameters, and yet gives them the space to do what they can do to the best of their abilities, and notices when they're failing or struggling, and gives good help. And that goes back to the teacher system. You can have somebody that's all gung ho on being a teacher straight out of college, and they end up working um, for another teacher, or with another teacher that doesn't care. That teacher's sitting behind the desk. and telling the kids, come here, go there, and directing everything from a seat, from a chair. So you can have that. Uh, so, it, it is the teacher, it is the administration. It's also having to do with bureaucracy and all the,
Mhm.
the funding and the strings and, what has to be done. It has to do with the worldview of the people around you and what they're trying to accomplish. And it goes back to the vision of that school
Yeah,
of, what is education? What is this about? What are we trying to do? Goes back to that
clearly.
leadership. Matt, to something you talked about on the uh, tax schooling being funded by taxes and stuff. The thought behind that, and I think it has some legitimacy, is that if the kid next door
Mhm.
isn't being raised right, is uneducated, and the kid across the street is out of control and doesn't have anybody holding them accountable at school, that affects my community. So
Mhm.
I want to have kids that better the community
Mhm.
because I want to have good employees. I want to have good neighbors. I want to be able to talk to a kid, that goes by my house and just say, hey, whatever. I don't want to have to put up bars across my window because the
Mhm.
kid next door is doing drugs and is a dropout.
I was
Uh,
gonna say that too when you said that,
Yeah.
because you made the sort of statement that you know that just sort of said it, that if I don't have kids, but I'm paying my tax dollars to pay for your
Mhm.
kids to get educated, whatever, and and that did cross my mind. I was like, well, I even if I don't have kids, I want your kid. Even though I have kids, I also still want your
Mhm.
kids to be educated too. I don't,
But again,
because those are going to be employees one day, and those are going to be parents one day, and those are
uh-huh.
so education does benefit us all,
Yeah,
good
yeah.
quality education. So if we're willing to spend a little bit more, and you know, I guess where I come down on like government spending in general is like it can come with strings attached, but also you all of this goes back to what you guys have just sort of made a central core to this thing. It's all about the teachers and how the teachers teach, and how they communicate and what the culture of teaching is. And so the if we're not paying teachers well, if we're not educating them
Mhm.
when they're going through their education well on in general, then they're going to come out and they're not going to be good teachers, and they're not going to be well paid or well incentivized. And so you're going to have this sort of doomsday scenario to education.
Yeah, but don't forget that buy-in is extremely important here. It's a currency.
Yeah.
Trust is a currency. And what is not happening is that the money that's being spent is getting great return on investment. And it's very difficult to gain the buy-in that's necessary to get that funding routed the way that you want it to, if it's already failing so poorly. So it's a capital problem, and the capital is people's trust.
But the solution is to not take away, like withhold your funding because you're not teaching good, like you're not educating our kids, so you get no money. No, I mean you keep the money there, or you just put more pressure on the culture to change.
You're not talking about keeping money there. You're talking about changing up who gets money. You're talking about increasing funding.
Well, there's another quote that I heard this week that I thought was pretty good because I was watching through some education things, and I think it's Thomas Sowell, which I don't always agree with, but I liked one thing that he said, that there are no solutions, there are just trade offs, right? So you you're trading something, right? So we're trying to fix funding by giving money, or not even money, but like subsidizing whatever, but we're it's that trade-off between, like you were saying, like, oh, what if I don't have kids, but the trade-off is I still want your kids to be educated, so I'm going to give up a little bit. I'm going to sacrifice a little bit of my tax dollars for that to happen. There's this trade-off that happens in a lot of
Right.
different things. There's not a
But you
perfect
have to
answer here.
convince
Yeah.
people. You have to convince people that it's in their best interest to have other people's kids educated.
Why do you
You've
have
got
to
to have.
convince people that that should not be
You
that
need to talk to your
complicated?
neighbors sometime about this. See what their buy-in level is, because the people that I know typically have very little faith in humanity. Everybody looks at other parents and are judging them. They don't think that the problem is funding. They think that the problem is poor parenting.
Well, that's
And
because this isn't framed well. This isn't framed well, and that's where a lot of this is kind of like why I wanted to have this conversation. Some of this, I don't think that we're going to solve all these problems per se, but I think if we can frame it in a way where someone can wrap their head around it, like, okay, education
Mhm,
is important, affordable childcare is important. I think all of these things are important. Okay, there's a trade-off here. Is it worth the trade-off? Is it worth spending a little bit more on these things? I would submit yes, but to what degree, I don't know. And you guys kind of have been,
mhm.
more focusing on the teacher aspect, which I think is great. And I think it's very important. But Rebecca, you look like you have something to say for that. Sorry.
Well, I think that right now we have huge burnout for teachers. Just
Mhm.
every teacher that I've talked with
Fact.
recently is burnt out. And
Mhm.
part of that is, pandemic related, but it didn't really start then.
No.
It was building. And I I can see where you're coming from, Matt, and saying like people aren't buying it because we're looking around and we're going, these kids are not actually learning the
Yeah.
things that they need to be learning. We have kids that are coming out of high school without really a high school education, without
Yeah.
knowing the things that they need to know to survive
It
in the real
basically,
world, or even to go on to higher education. They're
yeah.
not well equipped. Now, there are exceptions. There are kids that make it through the system and they come out just fine. They go on, they thrive. But that is the exception more often than the rule.
Mhm. Every once in a while you get a genius, but what we've got right now for high schools is idiot factories.
And I think
That's rough.
I mean, it's true though.
But
Talk
it,
to some high schoolers.
we there are some amazing kids out there.
Absolutely.
But I think as a whole, as we look at the whole system, it's not working very well. It's not working cohesively, and we're losing a lot of kids
Mhm.
who, even if they technically graduate with decent marks, they are not well prepared. They don't feel well prepared, and they're not well prepared. And if you look
Or
around at even people that are my age saying, I graduated and I don't know how to do, not myself because
Mhm.
my parents were awesome. Love you, daddy. Um, or, prepared us well for a lot of things, but there are kids that are going, I don't know how to do basic things. I don't know how to do my taxes. I don't understand how to do basic maintenance on my car. I don't understand how to make dinner, how to make anything. Like there are
how to
things,
do laundry.
how to do laundry. And I think that before we push kids to know trigonometry, we need kids that can actually go through what a basic day and be able to feel equipped to figure out how to do what they need to do,
Precisely.
because we're never going to teach kids everything that they need to know. That's just not, it's not possible.
Mhm.
But we
well,
need to teach them how to find the information because we're just swimming in information, and how to make logical deductions, and how to work with what with circumstances that they have. We need problem solving people. And that is not
And
what we have right now.
And the reason I say that we've been making idiot factories is because they don't value truth. They come through high school and they don't value truth. So when they go up against these problems, they're like, oh, I think. They're not valuing truth. And because they don't value truth, they don't find it. And sometimes, in order to value truth, you have to patiently be willing to reason with somebody and not just be like, okay, your truth, my truth. That's the safe thing to do. Takes a risk emotionally to actually engage people and say, okay, this is your perspective, this is my perspective. Maybe we can meet, maybe we can figure out some of the details that we haven't worked, put our information together to find the truth, or at least come closer to it. And because we've lost, these kids are growing up thinking that being at odds with somebody is the end of the world. um it just, yeah, it just makes people very disconnected and living in alternate realities, and everybody's looking at everybody else like, why are you an idiot? It's like, how could only an idiot would vote for Trump, only an idiot would vote for Hillary, only an idiot would vote for whoever. It doesn't, like, everybody's in their own little worlds because truth is not valued. So let's find out what the facts are together. Let's work towards the truth. In fact, the truth is not emphasized as a value, as something beautiful in education. So that's what I was referring to. I'm not trying to insult anybody so much as just making an observation that, what I'm observing is a lot of people who think that everybody else is an idiot, and I'm looking at them like, you are everybody else too.
Well,
Rebecca, are you going to say something or?
I think that it goes back to teaching people how to think logically and those
Yeah.
critical thinking skills that
Mhm.
are not, I think they're there. We are teaching them, but I don't think that we're teaching them well
Right.
to the extent that they need to be used.
And,
Mhm.
we've brought up uh, teachers, we've brought up administrators. That third stool leg to the stool is the parents, because as a teacher, I've had those situations where a student has clearly lied. It's provable.
Uh-huh.
There's no, I mean, they cheated on a test and it's provable. It's not any doubt. I can tell you some stories. And the parent said, well, my son has never done that before. Well, they maybe never did it before, but they've done
But
it
they did it
now.
now.
They did it
You should
today.
say, and they never rode a bicycle before they were 8 years old, but then they rode a bicycle. How's so hard to figure that out? My son would never do that. Your son is a human being. He's going to cheat. He's going to say things. He's going to do
Gonna
things.
push the
What is
boundaries.
wrong with you parents? It's just a basic misunderstanding of human nature, um, that is there with parents who will defend their think that somehow that it's being disloyal to their child when a teacher says they did this. uh, you know it's
I think
it's
that's always
even
existed.
if there's a doubt, it's an adult, and sometimes they make mistakes, but it's not going to kill you. Just and it may well be, it probably is, that this
So
kid did something wrong.
not only are this batch of students have bad reasoning skills, the previous batch of students who are the
Yeah,
parents have the
we've
bad
got
reasoning skills.
right. We've got a generation that previously used to be raised by TV. The kids would come home, sit in front of the TV. They didn't get out. They didn't do stuff. And now the current generation is, playing Minecraft, you know, 40 hours a week.
Full-time job
It's the
right there.
same thing. And parents feel guilty because, oh, they don't have any friends in the neighborhood, whatever, don't have any friends at school. So, we got to allow them to have, friends where they play with their friends across the country, and some pedophile or whatever, they don't have a clue what's going on with their kids, um, that they're online with, that they are, being socially, manipulated in various things. So, there's a lot of societal problems that begin, with the home
Mhm.
and the responsibility there. And, it's tough being a parent. There's times where I feel like I need to, apologize to you guys for the things that, now I'm looking back and saying, I probably should have talked about this or done this a little better, it's busy, you know, kind of thing. So it's challenging, but it is part of the thing too. A kid has their own responsibility. Maybe there was a four-legged stool now. They have accountability to themselves and have to be held accountability. Parents have a role in it. A lot of times kids can't go very far because of, parents. And then, the school teachers and the administrators all have a part of it, too. Everybody has a part, even, in the neighborhood, um, grandparents and other people, involved in kids' life too. The coaches and things can make a difference too.
Yeah.
Um, but it seems like we've left kids just to their own devices far too long. I'm gonna
Yeah,
stand up a minute. My leg is killing me.
yeah,
Sitting
my
here.
battery was about to die. I had to go plug it in. Earlier, I spilled coffee on my shirt, and then Chloe was trying to make coffee, and I was distracted and trying to help her out, and so been all over the place myself. But I guess I like that four-legged stool analogy. I think that was kind of cool. We've really gotten into the next topic, which was grade school, and we've talked about funding a lot, which was what I had for that for the next section, and so we've pretty much hit all that except for Common Core. That was something that I wanted to bring up. And I think I had a conversation with Dad about this last week, and where we talked about the Common Core. We're talking about how sometimes like the learning techniques that are used are, why are other countries doing better in certain subjects, and it's the way that they conceptualize. I can't remember the name of that. The Chinese, specifically, their calculators. They have the
Abacus.
yeah, abacus, and the reason why that's so effective is because the way it's laid out on a grid helps you really conceptualize numbers differently. And in America, we very much just sort of like have a linear view of numbers, and so when you're doing math, it's uh very rigid, the traditional way. And then somebody along the way said we need to install like and take a lot of these concepts with math as more of a concept and put that into a curriculum, and they called it Common Core, and then they just roll it out to the states. And the states are like, what in the world is this? I don't know how to do math anymore. And parents sort of backlashed on that. And I have to admit, I was kind of like on like, Common Core is the devil, for a while there, until Chloe actually was doing Common Core, and I saw how good she was at math. And I would have to say the drawback is I didn't know how to help her on her math homework because I didn't know what she was doing. But but she was actually really, really good at it. And I don't think they teach Common Core here in Tennessee, but they did in DC where we were when I was in the military. And so she got a really good head start on the concept of math earlier. And then we moved back to Tennessee, and it was like Common Core is the devil, and it got, kicked out. And it's like, to me, it was throwing out the baby with the bathwater. Like, yeah, there's some negative, thing to it, where like parents can't help, but it's also, it was good. It was good for her. And I think that she did a really excels in math even to this day because of some of that early foundation. So I know a lot of the conversations on, at least on the right, about Common Core are almost all negative. You will not find a lot of people supportive of Common Core on the right. Um, but I would have to say I'm probably one of the people that's much more sympathetic. Like I see the issue, but it's like to me, it goes. I'm glad I heard that quote because it kind of it summed up a lot of this education debate for me. Is this like there's not a lot of solutions, but there's trade-offs, you know? And so to me, that trade-off that Common Core had, needed to be explained to the population before it was just thrown into these schools. It needed to be explained to the teachers so the teachers can at least teach Common Core, even though the parents might not be as easy to or as have an easy time, helping kids with homework. Um, a- and uh, and I hate homework. I mean, when Chloe gets home from from school, and I want her to go outside and play, but she's got
Accurate.
3 hours worth of homework, and I was like, I want her to unload the dishwasher, do some basic household chores, and help with supper or whatever. She's at that age where she's helpful and stuff, but she's just sits there for 3 hours doing homework. It drives me absolutely nuts. And I can see Connor. He's a much less advanced student, at least at this age, and he is going to be struggling with homework. Right now, his homework is all reading, which is good, because he needs that reading practice, probably more than other kids. He needs that, but he's doing really well now. But so I guess a lot of this. Before I get too far away from Common Core, what do you guys think on Common Core? I'm curious to get you guys' thought on that. We'll start with Rebecca.
Um, well, I have not had to work too much with Common Core, so it's more conceptual for me. Um, but it does feel kind of startling to like looking at this homework when I have tried to help some kids with their homework and gone, uh, I thought I knew math, but I'm not sure what you're doing.
Yeah.
So there is a learning curve there. So I can't speak as much to Common Core exactly, but I do think that we need to shift um, the ways that we're teaching, and if that's done better through Common Core, I'm not sure. Like I said, I haven't had enough exposure to it to know how how it's doing in the classroom. But I think that um, my ideal world would be one that teaches reading, writing, math, critical thinking skills in the elementary grades, and then toward upper elementary starts actually allowing kids to use those concepts in more tangible ways, which I know is diverging off of your question, but
That's okay.
that's what you get when you ask me first.
Well, it is a curriculum question. It is curriculum, and I started it with Common Core, but it is more broader curriculum question, so that's fine. Matt, what are your thoughts on Common Core? Good, bad, ugly?
Ugly. Um, so whenever you go to do something, you need to have a clear path to getting it done. And Common Core ended up with what we call a false start, where it races off the starting line and then gets flagged for being, having left before the gun was fired, basically. Um, there was a clear need for two things, one of which Rebecca was addressing, which was that our methods don't teach everybody. Not everybody was getting how math was done traditionally. And something you mentioned also with the abacus. So alternate teaching methods is one of the big things that they needed to introduce. That has to be done slowly. They took it all on at once. They need to figure out what's going to work. They need to teach the parents, like give them basically an overview of what's going on, so that they're not trying to help their kids with homework and being completely alienated. So they did that incorrectly. But the other thing Common Core was attempting to do was being able to make the conversation across states more even, kind of like interstate commerce laws. Those exist so that you don't have kind of all kinds of craziness happening across borders. Well, it was, one state would have a high standard, but then be failing it, and another state would be setting a lower standard and excelling it, and then you don't know how they're doing. Like, there's no way to compare it. So having a common core, which was what the name was about, is clearly a good idea. How to implement that is another matter. Um, so That's the question. And I think that all got bungled up together into something that just really failed. So I would say it was ugly. Otherwise, you wouldn't have states where the Common Core was considered the devil, because the rollout was such a disaster. Some things were rushed, some things were unclear. Uh, so that
And
would be my criticism of it.
I feel like they spent a lot of time discussing what was going to change, but not why. They
Mhm.
didn't spend enough time on the why in the
Right.
rollout, and that to me is frustrating because it is something that I definitely get behind, at least in theory, and
Mhm.
so but it took me. I mean, it took me time to, I was kind of frustrated. I was like, oh no, Chloe's going to school. They teach Common Core here. She's gonna be left behind, illiterate, doing math the wrong way, doing upside down equations that don't even make sense. And that was my mentality because that's all I heard from, those people that I was listening to about how Common Core was evil. So, Dad, what were your thoughts on this? You have anything to add to Common Core discussion?
It goes back to trust. Do we
Mhm.
trust the Department of Education? Good question. you know, Especially where we have administrations that want to let the boys into the girls' locker room. you
And
know,
vice versa.
and it's that kind of stuff. Um, we there's so much going on at universities that is so insane that is against differs from our worldview. It's kind of like the saying, can anything good come out of Nazareth? No, of course not. Podunk. We don't. Can anything come out of the Department of Education? And then there's always teachers that are going to push back, and teachers have to learn new things. So you're going to have teachers that are against it as well, and the level of trust. So there's so much societal conflict whenever we do anything. You know, critical race theory, Common Core. You're going to have pros and cons. It's probably not all bad, but at its core, let's play on the word there. Are there things there that we would be concerned about as parents? Um, you know, and I've looked at some of those math problems too, trying to figure out like how did they work that, and why would you do that? Now, but then again, we're not in the class, and maybe there was an explanation, or is an explanation, but maybe the kids aren't faced with the same thing that we suddenly see on Facebook, where they say, do this problem, da da da, and then you have the memes that go like, um, well, what's the answer to this? Well, it's pancakes because it's Tuesday.
Yeah.
you know, and because we don't understand what the reasoning is, we're given some kind of something that doesn't make any sense because we don't have it's out of context.
Mhm.
And that's what it is. And so evaluating is difficult. And I am distrustful of the federal government and the things that uh, are being pushed through school, and because our society is nuts for a lot of things. They're all idiots, as Matthew would say, right? Well, I don't believe they're all idiots, but
Right.
yeah, there's a lot of strange stuff that's believed.
Mhm.
And it goes back to that truth thing. If everything is relative, you can't say with certainty about anything, and that makes no sense in the real world.
It doesn't correspond to anybody's personal experience. 2
Yeah.
plus 2, if you have 2 things and you have 2 things, you have 4 things. As long as those 2 and the 2 are the same thing, in which case you still up with 2 and 2. But,
So the verdict is still out on Common Core. I would giving it the benefit of doubt. I'm sure that there are good things in there. I'm also convinced that if you look real close, there's going to be things probably that you are very much disturbed about, because we're not just talking about math. We're talking about the social studies. You know, what do you choose to say about George Washington? Um, did a lot of good. He had slaves. Are we going to just cancel him? Martin Luther King. I mean, there's some sketchy things about him. Um,
And that's what we don't do now, that's very frustrating, is we don't evaluate people in the context of which they lived. We do so more in ancient societies. We're much more gracious to Alexander the Great and Caesars and the czars or whatever in the ancient history. But anything that's got color TV around it, we cannot detach ourselves from this this throwing things into like a political ideology, at least in my mind, and we view it through a very political lens. Um, so, um, yeah, I mean, again, I my views on Common Core are that it's generally good. It was just done poorly, and as far as like the rollout, it should have probably started with the class of blah, 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 and then been taught, then the next year it goes to the next grade. And so you're sort of getting kids sort of like, the group of kids will always be able to go up with it. You're not throwing a new way to do math on a fifth grader or sixth grader, and they've already, their whole life career, scholastic career so far has been with a certain type of math, and you throw new concepts on them. That's hard for a student, that's hard for teachers, that's hard for things. So I definitely agree with like the rollout issue, and there was a much smarter way to do it. And to your point on the things that they learn in schools these days, there's yeah, it, I agree that there probably are plenty of things that I disagree with, you know, and the other thing that I think about too is I teach my kids and I address things with my kids, and I teach my kids how to look at the world, not just what to think. I try to talk to them about how to think about the world, ask me if they have questions about certain types of things. And I think that that's the way I was largely raised. I viewed a lot of things through a lens of, this is how I think about the world, and that helped me evaluate. And there's a lot of things that people learn in school that just completely in one ear and out the other. Like
Mhm.
there's so many different things that I couldn't tell you about. I latched on to things that I was interested in, and it wasn't until some of those later grades where I actually feel like I did learn something in each subject. Um, and maybe I did have a little bit of a different experience, being homeschooled, uh, and not being exposed to a lot of those things. So maybe I'm just a little bit oblivious to some things that are being taught. Um, but I think that the to boil again, I try to, I don't have a ton to add to these conversations, letting you guys really go with a lot of this. Um, you'll have a lot more experience. Mine is just sort of through my kids, and
Mhm.
then sort of that political angle. But and we do have cultural differences in our society, and as far as like what is, you know, cultural values in the South versus, maybe some other parts of the country. Um, and when there's this top-down approach, I think you're talking about like being skeptical. That's
Mhm.
why I think I got a lot of the calls on Ukraine kind of wrong, when the State Department was actually putting out fairly accurate information on how Ukraine was going to be invaded. I just sort of like, well, it's just propaganda, because we don't trust them, don't trust anything. But, they were, fairly accurate on that. And that's where I feel like, you know, how do we communicate to those in power at the education Department of Education that this is what I need to get on board with what you're doing? I need to know why. you're wanting to make changes. I want to know why. And there are certain things that I'm going to have a problem with. Does my voice get to be heard? You know,
Mhm.
do I get to be listened to? And I think that is one of the most overlooked things in our society is, who's getting appointed to the Department of Education, who's getting appointed as the labor secretary, who's getting appointed at the Department of Commerce. All of these sort of smaller appointed positions all over, in the sort of administration of a government.
Mhm.
Those have big implications in our lives. Those people aren't voted for; they're appointed, and that is, I think, sometimes when we look at politics and we feel like we don't have power, and we feel like when we put somebody in power, things don't change, because they may have put somebody over the Department of Education, but their priority was something completely else, whatever. And so the Department of Education just sort of runs exactly the same way it always has, with a different, figurehead on top. And so maybe raising awareness, maybe some sort of campaign. If we're talking now, kind of going into like, how do we fix grade school down education? I think that needs to be where a lot of the conversation needs to be happening is, who is at the Department of Education? Can we trust them, and are they going to listen to our concerns? How do you, like, if I had a question right now, I would know how to get that question to anybody.
Mhm.
You know, like,
That that's the biggest
board
frustration
that
with
we
Common
elect,
Core.
who even votes in the election of our school board? Like, you
Yeah.
have to be pretty locked into politics or whatever to be following that stuff,
Yeah,
and
who's
that's a
on the school
shame.
board? Who's going to stand up and tell the school administration what's what, and get themselves hauled out in handcuffs?
Yeah,
There are three
Crazy
stakeholders
stuff. Yeah.
in education. The three stakeholders are the parents, the government, and just the community in general. The parents are the strongest stakeholders because their child's future is the most important to them. The government is a stakeholder because of being able to run businesses and economy. It matters. And then the stakeholders of the educators. Um, and the problem is that it feels like the government and the educators were cheating on us, like doing stuff behind our backs. And if ever you present that, if ever you do things without parental approval, without the stakeholders, if you ever set up the teachers against the parents, which unfortunately Common Core kind of did that, then you deteriorate that trust. And in order to actually fix this, it's going to take not just token getting parents involved, but we're talking about actually getting the parents involved from the top or from the beginning, from the get-go in meaningful ways. Until they can do that, until they will humble themselves to not be the professionals in the room who are the only ones who matter, um, there will not be change, meaningful change. There'll be just little trade-offs, and not actual meaningful educational change. Because I feel like that is why the reason Common Core started was because, comparative to the other countries, our education level kept going down. Like, but the fact of the matter is, those kids are not engaging with it. Their parents are completely disconnected from it. There's not that sense of why they're there. Most high schoolers, particularly middle school, not probably not so much, but high schoolers particularly, are in for 4 years. They're doing their time. Um,
Well, sometimes I wonder if it's a good thing to compare with other countries because, we had a Korean exchange student.
mhm,
Um, Kids went to school all day. They came home, maybe, or they ate on the way and then went to classes every evening. They had Saturday school just to keep that edge. And, do we really do we want that? I mean, in an information age, do
mhm.
you have to be able to do everything? Do you
Right.
need to be good at math and good at history and good at music and good at this? And,
Yeah.
at what point do we say, we're not robots, we're not machines. Yeah, we need to know facts,
Uh-huh.
and we need to be able to look up facts, and we need to not be, we need to have some humility,
Yeah.
there in
You
our life. But we also need time to think
yeah.
and to process things and think outside the box. And again, it goes back to what are we educating for? What is the outcome that we want?
What is our
We want
values?
these kids that are like in Japan that are committing suicide because they didn't get into school.
Yeah.
Are we, you know, just what are we raising and why?
Mhm.
And
How healthy are they? And Americans are big on this. We want the socialization. That was the whole thing against homeschooling. Well, they won't get socialized. Yeah, they get plenty of socialization. They won't be manipulated by their peers, you
Mhm.
know,
Yeah, Rebecca, let
and
me
they'll know how to talk to an adult and be an adult, not a kid, because all they've ever been around is other kids their own age. But, you know, do we really want to compare ourselves with Korea or Sweden or someplace? I mean,
yeah.
do we
Rebecca,
really,
let me
is that the standard? I am concerned when kids can't do math and can't read. Um,
Some just doesn't add
don't
up.
know basic history. I mean, you talk about the civil rights and they think it's a civil war. Or you
Mhm.
talk about the Civil War and they think that was like 1960 instead of 1860. Because they don't know. And you've all seen those things, where somebody goes to a college campus and he goes and asks this question,
Mhm.
and this student just
Bombs it.
bombs it completely. And you go like, what? What did you learn in school? You don't have any idea of any history or states or world,
How the world
places in the
works.
world. You don't know geography. Um, yeah, can't put together a sentence. We have, I've seen those papers, the resumes
Oh.
of college graduates that can't write a sentence, can't put together a resume, and it's awful. And you think
Mhm.
this is somebody who's graduated from an institution that can't put together, you know, a simple resume. It, it's just unbelievable. So so I'm not saying there isn't something wrong, but at the same time, I don't know that those comparisons maybe are good either. It's got to
Yeah.
be more. And if we spend so much on education, and again, what are we getting for it, kind of thing.
Mhm.
Throw it to Rebecca.
I think it is important to look at what our end goal is. And I think comparing ourselves to other countries it's it's there. I don't think it's the most helpful, but I don't think it could be totally disregarded. But I also think that if you look in the US, there are also children that have committed suicide because of the pressures of school. So I don't think that's just limited um, to Japan or to places that have more emphasis on education. Um, we have kids committing suicide for very different reasons too. So
Social reasons often.
social reasons, bullying, but also if they are in a family that very highly values education and they're not meeting up, like those issues still happen.
Mhm.
But I think, again, back to my ideal world, like if I could reshape the whole education system, what would I want it to look like? And it would look very different because I think right now we're set up to produce kids that can go on to higher education. Like that is the goal. You finish high school, you go on to higher education. Like that's our mentality. But I think more and more people are realizing that one, they're very ill-equipped to be going into higher education, and higher education is coming down to meet them where they're at, which is cheapening that system too. But because we're not raising people, we're not teaching kids basic logic. We're not teaching them how to put together sentences, how to write papers, how to convey themselves, their thoughts in well articulated forms, whether that be writing or speaking, because at the end of the day, not every kid that finishes is going to go on to higher education. They may not want that, and that's perfectly fine. Like that is not the end goal for so many people, and it shouldn't be.
Give a shout out to Nathan. Thank God for Nathan.
And there are so many people that feel inferior because they don't learn the same way, because they don't have the same interests, because they never want to go to college, like that feel less than in the education system, and they shouldn't. Like the point of education should be so that they can function well in adulthood and throughout their life. Like it's not just the end goal there, it's the how are we helping kids to thrive throughout their whole life.
I think,
and if every moment where our success rate is testing, like can they pass this test, then we are doing a disservice to kids that don't test well, that kids that can understand it. Maybe they have a good understanding of the subject, but they can't show it to you in the way that you're asking them to show it to you. So we need to have better ways of testing information, more diverse, but we also need to, again, have more diverse ways of learning. And I think that we need to implement ways for them to flesh out that learning. So yes, we're teaching reading, we're teaching writing and reading and arithmetic and logic and critical thinking skills. Like those are the things we need to be teaching, and then we need to give them an outlet so that the kids that learn better with their hands are not just getting to do that when they're in kindergarten or preschool. They're getting to do that in first grade and second grade and third grade. But there's also an option for a kid that doesn't want to do that. And I know that I'm outlining a world that's very hard to pull off, because I understand in a classroom setting, there's usually only one teacher and there's a lot of kids, which means a lot of different potential ways that you might need to teach them to actually reach them. But I think we need to do better on class sizes. We need to have smaller class sizes. We need to have more support for the teachers and more. There is a lot of support out there, but it's getting it to the teachers. There's a lot of training out there. There's a lot, man, there's just so much written about education. There's so much training that you can have. But we need people who specialize and can work through certain things. If math is your thing, maybe you teach math to more than just one grade. Maybe you teach it to multiple grades in a smaller range. Like, we've got to change if we want to see improvements.
I had a couple thoughts when you guys were talking. One thing is, because I being in the healthcare industry and thinking about all the problems in the healthcare industry, and I want to do a healthcare episode eventually. Maybe in two episodes from now, and the problem with a lot of that is, like, there's this insurance bureaucracy, there's the healthcare bureaucracy, and then there's government bureaucracy, and it just creates this like three-headed monster of the apocalypse of healthcare, but in education, I thought that this would be more simple, because it you're talking about there isn't sort of a third party. It's just government, parents, or maybe parents are the third party, but that's the easiest, it's not a bureaucracy, whatever. And then the other thing too that I thought about is paralleling, with what my background is, when you're talking about specialization, I think that there was Jasmine talked about in her school, I think, and so maybe, well, she probably won't watch this episode, but if she does and she hears this, maybe she can set me straight. But about there's like a scholastic path and a vocational path. So if you choose whether you want to go to college, like a 4-year degree or a technical college, and so they do tailor some of your classes towards vocational studies, and then others towards how to get into college and succeed well in college. And so I thought that was cool. I thought that was interesting, and I think that was the first person I ever heard that. And I thought that was cool. But then, when you were talking just now, it gave me the ideas like there are subjects that people excel in. And I think specifically, my wife does not care for history at all. She would be one of those people on that, whatever, where you put a microphone in her face that like name 3 countries, and she'd be like, Arizona, like, because she doesn't care, it doesn't care at all. And then you say, then I cannot look at my wife and say she's not educated or not smart, and so it kind of changes my perspective a little bit, because she's one of the smartest people and she works in healthcare, and she's, I'm asking her a lot of healthcare questions all the time, and from that nursing background. So she's a highly intelligent and functioning person in society, but she doesn't care anything about history, where to me, I'm like, man, you got to know history, you got to know science, you got to know basic stuff, you got to know which way the earth tilts with, with the seasons, these are important things that everybody needs to know. But then I think about how, what again, boiling it down, what is the point of education? Is it to give you a great life and a good context to live in? So if you did like 1st through 6th grade, you did these general studies where you learned math, but then your high school education was more tailored towards, like you were talking about specializing, right? So like if you were mechanically inclined, what if they did like HVAC systems and engineering classes,
and sports?
They, backed away from some of the, in sports, and that was a part of your curriculum. Whereas, and you could kind of pick some of these things, as a parent, make the parent choose these classes like you do in college, and sort of tailor it through, the system, through their education there. And then when they get to college, they don't have to reiterate some of these things. Maybe there's some
when
room.
you tailor it, you've got to make sure you do it swiftly. So anyways.
Right. Okay. I get it. But yeah, sorry, my train of thought is gone now. Thanks, Matt.
My apologies. There are only Asians and Bijans, right? Moving along.
How the
Like what and what? I didn't even understand.
Asians and Bijans. That's all there are. No Cesians.
Okay.
Yeah.
I get
no idea what that means.
It's going over my head. Like I get it.
Yeah, we might have to talk about that later.
Yeah. So college and tech schools and the price of college. That's our last subject. We've been check my timer, like
next week.
Over an hour.
That ties into what I wanted to.
Yeah, go ahead. Take us into that real quick, and then we'll try to make this a little more brief since we've been.
Well, so one of the problems is that success is a very elusive goal. If you seek it, you won't find it. And that's kind of ties into what I was talking about with Asians and Bijans. The ideal for many Asian parents is to have success in school. It is the goal that they aim at. You bring home A's, you're a good student, you're a good child. You bring home B's, okay, you need to work harder. You bring home C's, you're not Asian. The problem here is that the goal is set to succeed in a way that doesn't equal human flourishing. And even whether that goal is, in America, many times parents will have their goal be, you go to high school and you get good at this sport and you get a free ride through college because you're good at this sport. But really, I want you to become a professional NFL player and whatnot, or basketball, or whatever the thing is. For girls, it's probably very different. I'm not sure exactly what that would be. Rebecca could probably tell me a little bit more. But yeah, there's often
It's still the doctor. It's still the
yeah,
yeah,
it's
all those things.
it's
Yeah.
yeah, it's all of these different things that we define as success. If we define success as um, thriving and doing something that you love and doing it well, then I think we could actually see more success as a whole. Um, and if that were the case, then you would have multiple different pathways that are well provisioned. There's a lot of people. One of the things we mentioned earlier, there was a lot of people who are basically on the bus. They're on the right bus. They're in the wrong seats. Teachers who enjoy teaching, but they're teaching the wrong age group. There's teachers who enjoy teaching, but the curriculum does not even engage them, and they're trying to teach these kids. There's all types of things, and they don't have any freedom to actually to come up with a curriculum that would work, or to see curriculum that would work. And there we have bureaucracy happening. So there's a lot of things that happen because I think our picture of success is not correct. So that was my point with that. Oh, and to answer your question about high school and trade schools, I really think that a huge part of fixing our problem would be having no more mandatory education than 8th grade. Revolutionary idea, right? That it used to work really well. Mandatory 8th grade education that gives you that common core. That's what original common core was, that there was that everybody knew how to work problems, at least in this direction. You may figure out other ways to work problems, but at least everybody knows how to work it this way. And you have a common educational core all the way through 8th grade. After that, if you wanted to pursue higher education, if you wanted to pursue high school, you had to prove that you wanted it. That's a big part of success, is challenge. If it's not a challenge, you don't succeed. You don't know why you're there. You don't care. So you have to establish why before you can establish what, and then you can establish parameters of success. So,
I think we should have 14th grade. Should go through the
well, yeah, probably 14th. But at any rate, I think high school, if you made it freely available, the rest of high school. So 8th grade education, gets you through 10th. Yeah. So if you made high school a optional thing that you could continue your education in high school at any point past. So you're only mandated to go through 8 grades of class. You can start working. You can do whatever you want with your time instead of being stuck in classes you don't care about. And you go into the workforce.
Apprenticeship.
Yeah, you go into a trade or apprenticeship or something like that. And if ever you want to come back and get a solid high school education, it's not being clogged up by people who don't want to be there. It's just the people who want to be there and actually learn. Then you go through high school. At any age, you can have 50-year-olds going through high school that realized they really needed to figure this out. There's some things that they needed to understand in order to be able to move into a new career. They've been in a trade, now their body doesn't work for them anymore, and they really want to learn this stuff. Because let's say that they really wanted to go to a trade. They went through high school, they burned all their time for 4 years. Now they go into a trade, and then they injure themselves at 40 years old. Now they got to go into something else, and they may want to go into accounting or something like that. There's no way for them to easily get into accounting, whereas you could learn those classes in high school, the fundamentals of accounting.
Colleges and things like that. There are ways to do that, and particularly if they're injured, there's government programs and things.
That is true.
Anything we're
But the
talking
point
about
is
that far from what we currently have. It's just a different mentality.
and we're also wasting people's time. Terrible idea. It gives them learning a bad taste.
But
It's a terrible idea to waste people's time.
So what do you think about like free tech school or free
Yeah.
free vocational school?
free
Yeah,
tech, free general high school, maybe even free college, but just
free
make it where
community college.
people are not mandated to go through something that is not teaching them anything. Up till 8th grade, I feel like most kids are really actively learning this, unless their home life is a disaster.
Well,
They
that's why I said through
there's
14th grade. And I wasn't really joking actually in a way, because I thought to myself, if you go through the first 2 years of community college and that's all free, so you can go all the way up through community college, and then you transfer to a 4-year college, whatever, or the first 2 years of that 4-year college are free, and then you pay for your education after that, whether you want that engineering, nursing degree, whatever you want, that requires something further, marketing, business, whatever, or you take that and you use those 2 years free for like a vocation. You can do that as well. But again, I like the idea of sort of like tailoring high school to go through it. I don't necessarily think after 8th grade you should just everything should be optional, but I think not that you could just drop out, but I think that you should have the option of what you focus on, more than just vocation versus uh college, like trade school or college. I don't think it should just be two paths. I think there should be like infinite number of paths, because you should be able to like select it. And I think that would allow parents to be much more like, okay, what is my kid good at, wants to do whatever, and allow them to pick. And then that way high school teachers aren't teaching kids that don't want to be there because they chose that class, and that you might still have some level of, people that don't want to be there, because their parents made them, choose that class or whatever. But so you're still going to have that. But I think that it should eliminate a lot of that, and I think that will help with a lot of the education burnout, that Rebecca was talking about earlier. Um, yeah, that's interesting.
the
So
other
we all
thing.
agree that we should have free college. Is that what we're all saying here, or at least through 14th grade?
No.
Absolutely not.
But I think that, again, there should be community college shouldn't be such a bad option. Like right now,
Yes.
it's kind of considered like, well, you could go to community college or you could go to a real college. Like I think that it should be an actual good option for those who want to learn more. But I think, in the tailoring of high school, I think that you would have people that ideally are learning something useful, something that they see the value in. If they want to go into mechanics, they're learning that. If they want to learn how to run a household, if they want to learn how to, do their own taxes, like that's an elective, like making high school more like college in the you get to choose what you're actually interested in. And that also means having advisors who are there to talk with the kids and help them figure out what they might be interested in. Because, I do see the value of exposing kids to different things. You might not know that trigonometry would be interesting to you until you start it, which God bless those people. It's not me, but you might not know unless you're exposed to it. But I think that you should be able to not take a full math heavy high school if math is not something that interests you and you have no designs on learning it. If you want to learn that later, I think that's a great thing that you should be able to do. And you can, because there are colleges and there are online courses and there are so many ways, and there are libraries. We have a ton of information and access to information and education. But I don't think that we should be forcing it in the way that we are.
Yeah.
I'm kind of in the middle on that because, like, I think about how I joined the military and they basically said, well, you can't be a dental assistant, which is what I was doing. You have to be something else. So I chose medical laboratory science. And the things that I learned in that, and I actually found out now I didn't care to continue on in that field, but it was actually fairly good at it. And it came to me naturally. And so I guess when I'm thinking about, like, you shouldn't be mandatorily forced, when Matt says you shouldn't after the eighth grade, you should just be able to. If I had the option of dropping out of school at eighth grade, I would have dropped out of school at eighth grade. If I had the option of not doing half of the stuff, in education, I'm actually done a lot of things, a lot of different educational experiences, and most of them was because I felt either backed into a corner that I had to, or it was when I was in school and I actually had to. And those benefited my life greatly. And like you were saying with trigonometry, there's things that I didn't know I was going to like until I got into it. I didn't know I would have stayed away from all the maths, but actually turns out I'm actually fairly good at math. I'm slow at math, but I'm decent at it. I'm pretty good at it, I would say, actually. Uh, the general healthcare field, I'm good at it. It comes to me naturally. I don't have to study hard. I get I get it. You know what I mean? It clicks very easily. I would never have known that unless I kind of got into a situation where in the military where it wasn't really an option. Kind of like all the other options just sucked worse, and it just sort of chanced into it, so to speak, maybe. Um, or so yeah, so I guess I have a little bit of mixed feelings about that, but I do want to push you guys because I said, you don't think in free education up to like the 14th grade, but why? Why are you against that? If you're for paying through high school and you're not for paying for those vocational college or being free, why? I'm curious.
I have an answer, and it comes in two forms. For the one reason, the one difference between the system that I'm proposing and the system that you're proposing, and I get what your point was about being forced to do things you don't want to do, and I agree with it. But I will say this: that what you what you're given for free, you don't value as much. What you're given before you realize you need it, you also don't value as much. Therefore, the quality of education goes down. I took some time off in between college. I went to college right out of high school, and I realized this was probably a bad idea. And so I worked for a while, and then years later, I went back to college. Now I got to see the value of what I was getting out of my classes versus what my coworkers, I mean, kind of, yeah, my classmates were getting
Students.
out of theirs, and just the
What does that
life
have to do with cost?
experience. One second. So what my experience of my life was versus their experience of their life, they were not able to attach as much to the framework because they didn't have as much framework to attach to. So there was much less meaningful education that they received for the same, amount of time that I spent. So first of all, I understood where things fit. So that's why I'm saying later education is actually sometimes better education. The second thing is I also had gone through 10 years of not making very much money because I didn't have a higher education. And when people go through higher education early and then they get into a cushy job, they really don't appreciate the fact that they're making 40 some $1,000s a year. And I think they missed out, a lot of times for that reason too, is that they don't realize what they're actually getting out of their education is the ability to not just make more money as far as like some number, but what that actually equals to their life, what that can equal to them being able to raise their families and things like that. Um, I think a value for education, you get more value for an education that you pay for, and you get more value out of an education that you realize the rewards of, that you can kind of actually visualize the rewards from it. So sure, make education available for free. I would say there's a disadvantage of that, but at least it gets the barrier out of the way. So make college education free, but make it something where you go when you know what you want to do and why you want to do it. and what it's going to change about your life. Because if you go before that, if you're going and you're just trying to work through getting grades so that you can, have the ideal job of underwater basket weaving when you graduate, first of all, that's not going to materialize. There's so many degrees that are offered in colleges that have no match in the vocational world. There's nothing that you use this for,
Yeah,
and that's a problem.
I
So,
actually agree with you, and I'm not disagreeing at all. And actually, when I say free college through 14th grade, I'm not saying, and maybe I should phrase that differently because it sounds ridiculous. But I'm not really saying that you have to go. It's only free if you do it all at one time. I think you could
mhm,
stop after 12th grade and and then go later as an adult, but it's free for those, first 2 years. Um, so I don't know that I necessarily I think I think I actually agree with everything you're saying,
yeah,
more or less. Um there. And then
but maybe
any
like a
final thoughts
scholarship
on this,
method.
and then we'll talk about one last little quick ending question on student loan debt. We could go around. Rebecca, any last thoughts on this before we get into the last sort of more fun subject?
I think mine is kind of tied. Why I don't think that college should necessarily be free um, is because I think if it was free, more people would be forced to do it, and I don't think like you know even if you didn't make high school mandatory by some strange shifting of our culture, we were actually able to pull that off. Um, there would still be parents that would say, like, you absolutely have to do this. You have to go to high school and you have to go to community college because it's free and you're going to want it. Um, there could be some good in that, but I don't know that it's immediately better. But what I do think is that college should not be as expensive as it is. But I think that's also a cultural shift. I think that there's a lot of people right now that are looking at their college degree and they're looking at their job and they're looking at their student debt and they're saying, this is not good. I have a problem. I've spent all of this money so that I can hypothetically get a better job so that then I can pay back my student loan for 20 years. This is not like, this doesn't make sense. This is not a good system. And I think there are a lot of people that just went to college so that they could get a better job. Like, and that's a decent motivation. Like, there's
Mhm.
nothing wrong with that. I would,
But that shouldn't be the barrier to entry in those jobs.
right. I think that, um, wow, I just lost my train of thought real hard.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. It wasn't really your fault. I just got distracted. Um, I think
You're
there
talking
needs
about
to be,
cost.
yeah, the cost. There, I don't know, when you start making things free, you lose something,
Yeah.
but you gain. So there is a pro and a con to it, but I don't think that all college should be free.
I don't think all college should be free either, and I never actually abdicate or yeah,
Advocating.
advocate. Yeah, not abdicate. I never advocate for that per se but I think that those first 2 years of basic general education should be free, or vocational training, because the fact of the matter is if you're getting vocational training on certain jobs, you're not going to get out and get paid a lot,
Right.
in a lot of these trade schools. Some of them you get paid a ton, but some of them you don't. And
Mm.
if you can subsidize those, you can get in a situation where you're able to allow people to get a skill, and then able to make some level of income, and they're it's something that they're interested in doing and they want to do. And so I don't think you're cheapening that value, so to speak, on the trade school side. And I think for the undergraduate side of things, you're giving them those general education classes that they can do for free. And they're still going to have, because the idea is you're not getting those undergraduate degrees, those 2 years of college to not go on to a 4-year college. Most of the time you are. So your incentive is still there. So I don't necessarily, I would debate a little bit that it takes away, cheapens it that much, but I think it offers something that as a society, that I think that if we value having an educated population, like, we've talked about before earlier in this conversation, that I think that will help um, alleviate, like you're saying, the system's broken. People have too much student loan debt, and it makes our society so out of whack, the priorities, and makes people make, I think that you get to a certain level of like, I'm never going to be able to pay this back. So I'm going to buy this, but I can afford the payments, I guess, or I'm going to have to afford the payments. And then I want this car and I'm going to, not buy cash car. I'm going to put it on, I'm going to put it on payments, and you start building a culture around payments. And that's what we've got right now. And I think it's a very destructive place, because you can't just pack up and like, man, I want to go move across the country and start whatever, take some risk. I want to start a new business. I've got an idea. I think that you're burdened with like, I have to pay my bills off. So you can't be innovative. But I think that's something that I had this thought earlier, and I was trying to get it out earlier, was, when in America, we tend to, even though these other cultures that very focus 10 hours of college a day, whatever, a lot of times they're institutionalized so much that when they get into the workforce, they have a very rigid idea of what the workforce is, and they're not very innovative. And I think that's one thing that does make America very unique, is because we have so many people that are bad at school or fell through the cracks or whatever, but they were actually very intelligent people. And then they said, you know what? I see these patterns, we were talking about patterns earlier, and then they're able to innovate in a very spectacular way. And I think that makes America very special. That we have a
Yeah,
broken
that's all.
education system.
I want to just kind of throw a monkey wrench into this whole thing a little bit. When I went to school, college, it was affordable in the sense that I had the GI Bill. I worked full time, took a full load. Now, the type of job I had was a security guard, so that was great, because I could get 4 to 6 hours of study at work because they wanted somebody awake, to to be there in the empty building at night, kind of thing. So it was ideal. But I went through college with no debt. I mean, I paid it off. I took a loan for 3 payments and paid it off that semester in 3 months. And then I took the next semester and I paid it off in 3 months. So, it would be great if somebody could get an education and pay it off at the same time. Affordable. So affordable is there. But I also see this generation buys meals. I mean, I took my lunch to work. I drove a beater. you know, uh, there's just a lot of things that did it. Same thing.
Sacrifices were made.
Yeah, sacrifices are made to pay off those things. We have a generation that's got to have the latest computer, the greatest streaming, plan. They've got to have the latest phone. They're going to spend a lot on eating out. They're going to spend a lot on their house. They're going to spend a lot. They just have. I don't see where this generation that's, the 20 and 30 and 40-year-olds even are living in debt, and they haven't managed their money well. And now they're saying like, oh, we had this, $80,000 education and I can't afford it, but they're making $50,000, $60,000 an hour now. a year.
I
A
was like,
lot of
whoa.
them, not all of them. But I mean, not you guys. But I mean, a lot of them. I mean, I've worked with these guys that are making good income and complaining about the student debt, but they're driving in, $50,000 truck, and they're buying a $400,000 home. They just blow money left and right, and I can't pay for my, well, you know.
Well, I'm going to throw a monkey wrench
Let
in
me
your
let
monkey
me
wrench.
say
Go
one
ahead.
more thing,
Yeah.
if I could. Community college is affordable, I think. I don't know. I think it's affordable. So there is, in a sense, an affordable college. It's not a private college. It's not Harvard. It's not a state 4-year state school. But you could go to that school for 2 years and then transfer. Also, for every state institution and even private institution, if you're good enough, by the measures of schools, and if there's people who cheat to get that way and have tutors, and parents that could afford college, but they paid for the tutors in the private school so they didn't have to pay for college. I know that whole mindset. We paid for this private school, which is cheaper than paying for college, so that our kid could get in college. There's people who run that game, and it's not a bad plan, actually. But so there's a lot of things. Maybe those people who went to college and have this huge debt, and not everyone, but a lot of them didn't really need to go to college, probably shouldn't have gone to college, probably shouldn't have gotten that debt. So you can't just blame it. Yeah, I think there's something wrong with the cost of an education. I think it is outrageous, but I also think that it's not, the problem is not just the price of the college. It's outrageous. I agree. It needs to be less. But I
you're
also
saying
think
there are
there's people
options
in
that are
college that don't need to be there. There's people that are taking things that will never get the money to pay for it. And then there's people who have the money that aren't handling their money well. And just throw that out. But anyways.
Yeah, no, I want to throw a monkey wrench in your monkey wrench. So just to completely throw this off the rails, I think that but if it does tie into a lot of your debt culture, first of all, my solution for college affordability is it shouldn't be government subsidized. And I know I've been talking about having, government subsidized education in other areas of this conversation, but this is one place where I think that because the student loan is non-bankruptable, it is separate from the institution. The institution doesn't cut you or doesn't have any, they don't, a college
They don't
doesn't
have any skin
care
in the
what
game.
if you take underwater basket weaving or business administration. College doesn't care what your grades are. College doesn't care if you get a job after. College cares that you get enrolled and you stay enrolled. As long as you're enrolled and stay enrolled, then the government cuts them a check that you can't bankrupt they out of. And so it's this exchange that the college system is able to get this money, and the greed there, it's an incentive problem. Now, if the college had to look at you and say, do I want to have the liability that you're not going to pay this back in after you get out of school because you have an underwater basket weaving degree, and so I'm not going to loan you as an institution $50,000. You can have $5,000 of debt from us. You got to pay the rest of this. So people
Find a
would
patron.
not choose that degree because it's not affordable, because I can't just take out a student loan debt, on it. The school's not going to loan me that, so I have to find it either from a bank or from dad or from whatever. So if we made the college take a little bit more responsibility on the funding, they would say, yeah, I will let a nursing student or a doctor, student take out more debt because the chances of them paying that off are much higher than some of these other degrees. And so then it's not the price per semester, it's the price for per the degree that you're getting. So the market would dictate how it is. It's more a free market like system. So I think that that would help solve a lot of the student loan debt crisis that we have. But one thing that I wanted to say, you know, the reason I was going to throw that monkey wrench in there with what you're saying is like I I can afford to eat out every day. I can afford to drive that car because I can afford the payments on it. I can afford to do all these things as long as nothing bad happens in my life. I can make all those payments, you know? So why not? Why would I not drive a truck? I want a
Because
truck.
something bad's going to happen tomorrow. Your car is going to break
That's the
down.
problem. That's the problem. And then we want to cry about it when something actually happens because everybody's going to have something happen. But it's this cultural like acceptance of we've got to have that. And another thing too that is really I think I can't remember who I was telling this to the other day is I realized that there's 18 million millionaires in the United States right now. That is a lot of millionaires. That's the more
18.
millionaires. What?
How many?
18
18.
million millionaires
What?
in a populate, but that's net worth, right? So if my house is worth $400,000 or $500,000 and I only owe $250,000 on it because the value of my house has gone up, whatever, by like 20% over or 60% over the last 2 years, then you have some net worth, right? If you take your cars, you know, the value of cars right now, used cars are like retaining their value because of the supply chain crisis. But that's a side note. But the fact is like you maybe make $40,000 and your spouse makes $50,000, and so together your household income is $90,000, and you've been putting into a retirement income, you know, for the last 10 years, that you've built up maybe $200,000 of equity there, and so by the time you're 40 years old, you might actually have a net worth of $1 million, and you set your kids up where you know you might have a kid that you pay for their education, like the second generation you are able to pay for some of their education, and they don't have the student loan debts, but they start a job making $60,000 a year, and yeah, they have a cars or whatever, you know, BMWs, they're driving nicer cars, but you know they're able to set back money and set it aside. So now you have this sort of second. I feel like we're in the second generation of millionaires that don't feel like they're millionaires, or they own a business and so they have equity in their business. Like you maybe have a business that has $500,000 in equity, and you have a house that has some equity, like $500,000 in equity. So you're a millionaire, but you're only making $50,000 a year out of your business. Those Why did I say all that? I got off on a sidetrack, but I guess that number shocked me, but it also explained a lot to me because these people aren't living like you would think a millionaire lives. These people are probably not paying a ton in taxes because they're writing it off. They have a business, a lot of it, you know, or trying to, you know, write a lot of it off. You know, they probably are paying a lot in taxes, but, you know, they're not when you have 18 million people in your society that are able to live well, you know, and might be crying about, you know, the cost of this or that, you know, because I feel like, you know, we all complain about our situations, right? Doesn't matter if you are poor or you think you're poor. We all complain about our situation, our financial situations, you know, and I think that I don't know. I just seem to put a lot of things in context for me, and it makes me less sympathetic, but also more sympathetic. It makes me less sympathetic to like the argument of, you know, the rich should pay more in taxes because there's so many people. There's 18 million people that have $1 million net worth. You know,
Mhm.
people can afford. Some people can afford to pay taxes, but then there's so many people in poverty right now that the cost of everything around them, they're just one, um, you know, like we said, one, you know, bad thing happening away from the whole house of cards collapsing around them, and they're in precarious situations. So, um, yeah, I that's my spew on that. I don't know. I really did throw a monkey wrench in there because I didn't really have a Uh, there was no question in that. It was just
Well, I think it goes back to my point is that some of the complaining is not justified. I think I think college is expensive. I think just the cost of living is very expensive because everybody does need internet. Everybody does need to have a fairly decent phone in order to live. Um,
But it's like we make
there's
it where
an
you can buy a
expectation,
Samsung for like, $50 a month or whatever, or you can get an iPhone for $70 a month. Which one are you gonna go with? And then we walk around and go, oh, they're wearing, expensive clothes, expensive cars, whatever. But like because we've got this sort of debt culture where it's all payment based, it doesn't it just feels like it's a bunch of little pinpricks, that we look at them and we judge them, but really at the same time, I got the same phone. You know what I mean? Like, but I'm judging them and I'm sitting here thinking I'm poor, but but that's because I got a deal on these phones, you know what I mean? That like, yeah. So I guess
Yep.
it, it goes back to like the culture of how we think about a lot of this stuff. And I think we are hard on each other in general. And I think that we again having so many people that live and are able to live well makes everybody think that they should have that equal lifestyle. And another thing too, when we're talking about marketing, in the context of the dental office that I work at, it's funny because, and not just there, when I took a marketing class, it's like, don't try to market to everybody, right? That's a no-no in the marketing world. You want to find who your niche market is. You want to find who your group of people that you're targeting is. And almost always it's household incomes of more than $100,000 a year and college educated usually, because that, helps get into that education bracket. It's a certain demographic of people that you're targeting. Everybody else, don't worry about them. Your product is supposed to be helping people's lives. Your product should be beneficial. Your product should be, if it's a good product, you hear that all the time in business. Your business should be solving somebody's problem. Okay, but you need to target that business, and then the marketing people are like, okay, and then find the people who can afford your product. It's these 18 million people. Everything in our society is about these 18 million millionaires, the middle class. So everybody else, don't waste your time getting them. They don't have any money anyway. They're on payments. They're one, bad thing happening away from their lives, going in complete and total ruin. Don't worry about them. Don't target those people. And so I don't know. It just to me that seems to be the way that our culture is, and it's a shame. I kind of look at it and I think it's a shame, and when I see people in my dental office that can't afford dental treatment, sometimes I don't know who they are. Are they just one of these 18 million people that,
thinks
like,
they're poor and saying, "Oh, I can't afford it." Yeah, I've had that
yeah, but they can't afford it,
experience.
or are they truly can't afford it? And
Mhm.
how do I price? I can't price my stuff so low that I'm not making any, I've got to keep the lights on in the office, but other people can afford so much more, like, and for the services that we're giving. So it just makes it, again, there's a weird dichotomy here that's going on. So let's see, price of college. So does anybody have any alternative ideas for how to get college cheaper than what I suggested, as far as making the colleges bear the burden of the student loan and not have it subsidized by the government?
I think
Uh,
it's a really intriguing idea. Sorry, Matt. Go ahead.
no, good.
Um, I would just go back to my point of I just don't think as many people need to go to college as they think need to go to college, but that would require a societal shift. And I fully realize that. Like right now, you do need a college degree to make a decent amount of money in most professions, or even to get into some professions. But a lot of those professions, realistically, if you could apprentice for a year working in that company, you would have the equivalent of college education in that field, and it would be something more useful. So going to more apprenticeships and actually having college as it is for people who need that specific degree. For absolutely, for our doctors, I would like them to have a, a full education. Like, I want them in school. I also want them apprenticing, which they do, but like that's not somewhere we want. It has to be based on what you're actually looking to do. So I think that we should have less debt overall, because I think less people should be going and should have other options for
And
acquiring a good paying job.
And oddly enough, this is weird, but the amount of scholarship money that is going currently by businesses into the educational program, if that were to be divvied up among those who actually have a valid reason to go to college, as in people who are going into a career that needs that, I think there would be more than enough scholarship money to cover in the education. Because all of the scholarship money's going in, it's being split among so many people. I mean, but they don't need to be there. I
Or
feel like, yeah,
sorry.
go ahead. I feel like half of the education that I got, at least half of it, would really have been better done as an apprenticeship.
Yeah,
So,
that's kind of where I was going. Like, even those companies that are funneling money into scholarships, if they channeled money into apprenticing people, I think their money would be better spent.
right.
I have the experience of being a trainer for a number of years, and the state, one of was Mississippi, would fund the training, not in its entirety, but we could get back, a certain amount of money. We get a couple thousand back each month back from the state. It we got back about $80,000 each year for training. I would have 2 or 3 classes a week, 10 or so people, 10, 12 people, each week. And so it didn't cover everything that it cost, because you have 10 people, their paycheck for an hour class or a 2-hour class, type thing, generally 2-hour class, that type of thing. And so you have that cost, you have my salary cost and all. But at least if you look at it that way, it paid my salary, provided for it. And I think, again, that's the right kind of training, because it's specific. The company was willing to spend it because they saw the results
Right.
of what was being done. So we did quite a bit of training, each each week, each month, each year, quite a lot of training. So that, I still think that's a great way to go. That it's training that the company is going to do, hopefully would do anyways, but it makes it a little bit more likely, with that money there. And then there were sometimes special, even above that, that they would pay hourly for the training for, certain things as well. And that, even if those people went somewhere else, they gained the skill that they would use somewhere else. It's money that, people are increasing their skills, and the state's going to get it back in taxes, because those people have, grown, and the business is going to be, better, and earn more profits and things, because their employees are being more efficient in their jobs.
It's that
And
social responsibility, or what's the business word for it? I don't know what I've lost the term, but it's like where a business is conscious of its social value.
Obligation.
Yeah. And it's not just like green energy and things like that. It's also training, giving training, investing in people's training, giving them good quality training. And even if they only stay with your company for a year, or they go somewhere else and they use that training somewhere else, you haven't lost something. You've added to society, and then that
Right.
is something that's worth investing in.
There's a hope that what goes around comes around.
Yeah.
But I think in businesses too, if you are investing in your people, the likelihood that they will stay with you is much higher.
Yeah.
If you're actually providing them training and investing in them,
Hmm.
they are more likely to stay with you, or um, to expand beyond that.
Yeah.
And maybe go on to another company, but you're going to have a higher retention rate if you actually invest in your people. And some of that investment is just through training.
Yeah. This conversation has really surprised me because we've talked about government, businesses, parenting. We've talked about so many different things, and it's funny how education mingles its way into everything. And so it's fascinating, and I think that's why it's important to have a conversation like that, like this, on this political channel that that I'm trying to focus primarily on politics, but I think it has social implications, political implications. I think that we have to think bigger and better about education and rethink and question some of the assumptions. And I think we really have done that. And I'm really actually impressed by this conversation, the scope of it, that we've allowed ourselves to go into a lot of different places. And so, yeah, I'm really, I think that this has been a great conversation. Does anybody have any parting words before we conclude?
I think simplistic answers are the worst ones that you can have on a topic like education, and many times on both the left and the right, and even sometimes in the center, you hear very simplistic solutions to these problems. But in order to implement um, a holistic solution, which is the only solution that's going to work, you have to have that buy-in to a clearly defined objective. We need to know what success in education is. Is success in education having people who make the best grades in comparison to the rest of the world? Is success in education having people who are really artistic and our arts are fantastic? Is success in going to be defined as having the best sports? How we define success as a culture is going to matter. I would argue that the best success is what Rebecca has been bringing up over and over again, which is to have a people who can reason, have a people who have a clear understanding of right and wrong, morality and logic, and the idea that there really is a good and there really is a best and there really is a right and a wrong, and a value to knowing that. That's what made America's education system work. That's what made America one of the best educated countries in the world. Um, Parting comment here, last thing probably I'm going to say would be that I read a book by an Englishman who toured the United States in 1820, 19 and 20. Dad, I can't hear you.
That's fine. I was going to say you're going to give the quote by de Tocqueville or whatever his name is.
No,
No,
he was
okay.
actually
Oh,
he
Tocqueville
was
was
similar
French.
to.
Okay.
He was French. This was an Englishman, and he traveled throughout the United States, and he said that everywhere he went in the United States in the 1820s, every inn that he stopped in had books that were freely available to use, and they almost always had the Bible, a dictionary. And there was one other book you mentioned. I can't remember what it was, but it was, and often a lot of classical literature. That these are the things that formed that common core of the culture. They valued education. They valued the ability to learn, and they made it freely available to everybody. So there's availability is very important, but so is valuing it. And in America, we valued education more so than, say, France, more so than many of the others in the 1800s. And that really was what changed it. We wanted to learn, and that's what can change it again. If we want to stop failing in the education, we need to know, not only what, but we need to know why. Why does education matter? And those types of things are going to change it. And that conversation starts here. Not only on this podcast, but in bringing it up among our peers. So
Yeah,
I have thoughts, but I'm going to give Rebecca a chance. Or
Go ahead.
go for
oh,
it. Ed.
okay. I was thinking about the education of the foundation and what's needed, especially in elementary school, and it has to do with books that used to be available. Every book was a moral book. Education is propaganda. It is.
hmm
You're teaching the next generation what's important, what's valuable,
hmm
and we've got a lot of bullies. We've got a lot of people that feel like it's okay to cancel other people. We have a lot of immorality, just a generation that's just lewd and crude. And what's missing is the books that teach right and wrong, teach
hmm
moral truth, teach honesty, integrity. And they were in every book. Every book that you read, as I was coming up, that had had to do with honesty, about had about money, and you do something,
wisdom.
give it back. I mean, there was just story after story after story that taught being honest, being kind, just all the things that you would think of that have to roll into that. And I haven't looked at children's books in a while, but you know a lot of the children's books are trying to teach other things, that are in them. And I think that's part of the element that we're seeing different results because we're doing something differently. If you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you always got. If we don't like what we're doing and what the results are that we're getting, we've got to change something. And if we had better results before, and I'm not sure that we had great results before either.
And
I think
some.
my generation was very good. We had the Bill Clintons and the and a number of other people that were just like, wow.
We had well
But
polished turds, though.
so there's I still think that we have to look at it that it's okay to have propaganda. It's okay to purposely teach morality and things like that. Again, it's who's deciding what that is, who's deciding truth. And we've come down on the side of there is no truth, your truth is your truth, and blah, blah, blah. Well, that doesn't get us a very healthy civilization, when we don't have agreed upon principles. Even, we don't want to be, overly overdoing it, but we do need to be patriotic. This is a country, we're all in the same boat. We salute the flag. No, it's not perfect, but we're here, and we can't just trash that heritage and all. So that's my final word.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Okay. Parting thoughts.
Oh, I don't know. Dad brought up more things. Just thinking about in New York State, there is a big emphasis on teaching emotional literacy in the preschool ages specifically.
For
Which,
those of us who don't know what it means.
yep. So that would be talking about your emotions and expressing your emotions, and doing that in constructive ways, um, which I think is fantastic. I could go on for another hour. I won't, but I could, um, about how important it is for children to be taught how to express their emotions, um, from a very, very young age. That is like the biggest reason that children have temper tantrums, is because they have this well of emotions and not a good way to express them, or they're not heard by the people around them. Um, and yes, there's a lot of factors that go into temper tantrums, but most of the time it boils down to they are trying to communicate something and they're not able to express it well, or they're not being listened to when they do express it. Not that a toddler should get everything that they want. That's a different conversation. Don't hear that from what I'm saying. But um, talking about what we're teaching in books, there's the really good side of teaching kids to express their emotions, and emphasis on emotions aren't bad. They are indicative. They tell you what is happening inside you. But where I get a little nervous is what we do with those emotions can be good or can be bad. And some of the books that I have happened across in the process of trying to implement this have definitely gone to the it's okay to be angry. And it's like, yes,
Okay, don't
yes,
stop
it
there
is.
though.
That's great. Like, it is okay to be angry. It's not okay to, pummel your friend. It's not, these are the parameters around it. And I think, that literature sometimes falls short, but some do a really good job of saying, these are our emotions. Let's name our emotions. Let's talk about the ways they affect us so you can clearly identify what's happening and then what we do with that. So that was just what you made me think of with the literature there.
Mhm.
But,
I don't know if you heard me. Be angry and sin not. I mean, it's
right.
yeah. Anger is normal. It's motivation to change something that there's an injustice, but it has to be focused on being something, constructive rather than destructive. And sometimes our emotions are wrong because we've misjudged the situation or the person or whatever. So yeah.
I see your point,
Yeah.
but the emotion itself is not, it's not a good or a bad. Like, it could be
No,
incorrect. It could be
it's
informed
incorrect.
incorrectly.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
And it might not be reflective of the truth. Like, our emotions are not truth.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
They are simply a reflection of what is happening internally.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where, if you can name your emotions and you can identify, like, I feel sad about this versus I feel angry about this, then you can come up with better ways to handle that.
Yeah.
And that's kind
And
of my,
also give the person opportunity to ask for forgiveness or to see what
for
you're
sure.
seeing and correct that misunderstanding, all of those things. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, good
Yeah.
point.
Well,
And
go
yeah.
ahead, Matt.
Well, I was just going to say that your emotions and your thoughts are two separate systems that have different purposes, just like with your hormones versus your electrical synapses, whatever those neural system. One is super fast and does a particular job. The other one does a very much broader job and is slower. Your thoughts are easier to maneuver than your emotions are, but they also lead. And if you're not careful, though, you can have an emotional wave that then takes over. So I would say that teaching children to both feel and think in tandem, and to learn to think well and then feel well is actually the best approach. You can't just stop and say, "Oh, emotions are great. Follow your emotions." No,
Emotions are not
Don't matter.
necessarily great.
No, they're not. They're
It's that
valid in
emotional
that.
intelligence.
Yeah, they're valid in that they are truly what you feel, but they may not be reflective of the truth.
For sure.
So, and
Yeah.
that's how you should teach that. So,
I feel like
yeah,
there's a compensation I think that happened where I think a lot of people who have made this curriculum, in particular the one you're talking about, where you should have expressing your emotions. It comes from a sort of culture of where you're not allowed to express your emotions, where everything is shut down. You are a kid. You should not have feelings. You should not, whatever. You should go along. You should be seen, not heard, whatever. And so there's this sort of backlash to that where it's like you need to be able to express yourself and have this emotional intelligence, and trying to teach that at a young age, which I think is fine. But I think that there is uh some people don't know how to translate that, or they don't get the message when they're teaching it, and what the purpose of expressing your emotions is. And they teach it in a way that comes across where it's like, it's okay just to let all your emotions run wild, and it's okay, all emotions are valid, and you should just, you know, you know, which I think you just can't stop there, which, it's like it's an okay place to start, but you can't stop there. And I think that a lot of people, when we're talking about this, is all about cultural acceptance and norms. And we live in such a huge, diverse country. And, what we think is right here and how things should go isn't how other groups of people always think that that's how it should be. In African American culture, there is a different sense of how things should be and what is acceptable to say. And that's true of the Asian cultures, and that's true of many different sort of subcultures of, white culture, and Southern culture, hot culture, hot, cold culture, hot culture, Southern culture, and all these different things. And so blending these all together, and that's where, like Dad was saying, just to tie everybody's conclusion together, is like, having the Pledge of Allegiance, having like being an American first, so to speak, which I hate to use that phrase, but thinking of yourself as an American, and thinking of yourself as, and holding these principles um,
to be
closer to your
self-evident.
identity than some other things can help us kind of move forward. So, yeah, again, I appreciate the conversation. It's been really, really fun. It's gone longer than probably any other episode that we've ever done. But we've covered a lot of ground. And next episode will be monetary policy, and we're going to talk about stuff like that. So that'll be really exciting. And you should definitely join us in all of our deep dives. And thank you for tuning in to the Jonny Random Show.